The cage in the dark, the hallway was cold and silent. Deep inside an alien research base, a secret was kept hidden from the world. It was not a weapon, not a treasure, just a living being. A woman. An alien woman, locked behind thick bars, surrounded by darkness and forgotten by most. They called her a monster. Shala had not spoken in days. Her glowing silver eyes stared at the wall. Her skin was pale, marked with thin lines that shimmered faintly in the dim light. She sat still, barely moving, her arms wrapped around her knees like a child trying to stay warm. But no warmth ever reached her in that place. The guards didn't speak to her. They only watched from behind their glass window. Some were scared of her. Others looked at her with disgust. Rumors spread in the station. Some said she could melt minds. Others whispered that she had killed an entire patrol with just a scream. But no one had ever seen her do anything like that. Still, the fear remained. Then came Mason. He was just a maintenance worker, a human who fixed broken lights and faulty panels. He didn't come to the base to deal with secrets or strange prisoners. He only wanted to finish his contract and leave. But fate had other plans. Mason first heard the whispers when checking a power fault, a soft sound like someone breathing in pain. It came from behind a locked metal door. The guards nearby warned him, "Don't go near that room. She's dangerous." They didn't explain who she was. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. Something about the sound haunted him. It wasn't a monster's cry. It was too quiet, too human. The next day, he found a way to enter the restricted area. He told no one. Carefully, silently, he stepped into the lower level. The air was colder there. He followed the hallway and stopped in front of the door. There were warning signs everywhere. But still, he opened it. That was when he saw her. Shala didn't move. She sat in the corner of her cage, too weak to even raise her head. But her eyes found his glowing softly in the dark. Mason froze. She looked nothing like a monster. Her face was tired, her body thin. He felt a strange sadness rise in his chest. He whispered, "Can you hear me?" At first, there was silence. Then, in a voice so faint it could break, she replied, "Yes." Mason stepped back, shocked. She could speak, and her voice, it didn't sound cruel. It sounded broken, like someone who hadn't been spoken to in a very long time. "Why are you locked in here?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the floor and said, "Because they fear what they do not understand." That sentence stayed with Mason the rest of the day. When he tried to forget her, he couldn't. Her eyes, her voice, the pain in her words. He wanted to ask more, but he knew he couldn't be seen going back. Still, the next night, he returned. Shala was still in the same place. This time, Mason brought a water flask and some fruit. The guards didn't notice. She looked at the gift, confused. "No one brings me food?" she said quietly. "They should," Mason replied. "You're not an animal." She stared at him. "For a long time. Most here think I am." He sat down outside the cage and began to speak. He told her about Earth, about growing up near the sea, about the stars and the stories humans shared. She listened, never interrupting. Slowly, her shoulders began to relax. For the first time, she asked, "Why are you kind to me?" Mason looked up at her. "Because you didn't choose this. And because I don't believe you're what they say." Shala closed her eyes. A single tear ran down her cheek. "They fear my kind because we can see what others hide." "What do you mean?" She opened her eyes again, but said nothing more. Mason understood she was scared. Maybe not just of the aliens who kept her here, but of trusting anyone. As he stood to leave, Shala reached out, just slightly, fingers brushing the cold bars. "Will you come again?" she asked. Mason nodded. "Yes, I promise." He didn't. know why he made that promise. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, or maybe he saw something in her no one else bothered to see. But deep inside the base, cameras watched everything. And someone was beginning to wonder why the human kept visiting the cage in the dark. The walls had ears, and danger was coming. Asterisk whispers. In the dark, Mason couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, the alien woman with the silver eyes and quiet voice. She was supposed to be dangerous, a monster. That's what everyone said. But he had looked into her eyes, and what he saw wasn't danger. It was fear. For 2 days, he stayed away. Tried to forget her. Tried to tell himself it wasn't his business. But the guilt kept eating at him. She was alone, locked in a cold cage, and no one cared. On the third night, Mason returned. This time, he didn't sneak. He walked through the hallway like he belonged there, carrying a small pouch of supplies. Inside were soft cloth, clean water, and a few food cubes he had traded for. He knew if he got caught, he could be fired. Or worse. But something deep inside told him it was the right thing to do. When he entered the room, she was awake. "You came back," she whispered, sitting up slowly. Mason gave a small nod. "I brought you something." He slid the pouch through the bars. Shala hesitated before touching it. Her hands were thin and shaking. She pulled the cloth out first and stared at it like she hadn't seen anything soft in years. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you help me?" Mason didn't answer right away. He sat on the floor, just outside the cage. "Because you shouldn't be in here. You don't look like a monster to me." Her eyes shimmered in the dim light. She held the cloth close to her chest like it was the most valuable thing she had ever received. "I had a child," she said quietly. Mason's heart stopped. "What? They took him, years ago. When the war started, they took him and said he was a threat, just like me." She looked away. "He would be your age by now." Mason felt something heavy in his chest. He had expected sadness, but not this kind of pain. "Do you know where he is?" Shala shook her head. "I don't even know if he's alive." Mason sat in silence for a long moment. He wanted to say something comforting, but there were no words strong enough. Instead, he asked, "Why do they fear you so much?" She looked at him again, her silver eyes almost glowing in the darkness. "I can see truth," she said. "When I touch someone, I see their past, their pain, their lies." Mason blinked. "You mean like a memory reader?" She nodded slowly. "It is our gift. But to them, it's a threat." He understood now why they locked her up, why no one wanted to be near her. Because if she touched them, she might uncover something they wanted hidden. Fear wasn't always about danger. Sometimes fear came from guilt. Suddenly, Shala reached her hand toward the bars. "I want you to see," she said. Mason hesitated. He didn't move. "What do you mean?" "Your kind doesn't believe words. But maybe you'll believe what I show you." His fingers touched hers, just barely. And then it hit him. His mind was flooded with visions, screaming, running, fires on an alien world, children hiding, soldiers shouting orders, Shala holding her baby and begging for mercy. And then cold, metal hands tearing her child away. Her scream echoed in his mind. Mason pulled his hand back, gasping. "It was real." "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You didn't. I believe you." She looked down. "You're the first." Mason stood up slowly. His heart was still racing. The memory felt so real, like it happened to him. He stared at her, no longer confused, no longer unsure. She wasn't a monster. She was a mother. "I won't let them hurt you again," he said. But as he turned to leave, the door behind him slid open. A tall alien officer stood there, eyes narrow and suspicious. What are you doing here, human? Mason froze. I was fixing a loose wire in the sensor room, he lied. The officer stared at him for a long second, then glanced at Shayla. Stay away from this one, he warned. She's not what you think. Mason forced a smile and nodded. But inside, his thoughts were spinning. He knew the truth now. And once you knew the truth, you couldn't go back. The order to end her. The message came in the middle of the night. A red flash on the comm screen. A quiet beep. No alarms. No sirens. Just a simple classified order marked with 2 words. Terminate subject. Mason read the words twice, heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't supposed to see the message. He had bypassed the security wall in the system just to see the station's activity logs. But this wasn't just an activity. This was a death sentence, and it was for her. Shala. He leaned back in his chair, cold sweat forming on his back. They were really going to do it. No trial, no hearing. They would enter her cell with a needle or a laser and erase her from existence. Quietly, secretly. Just like they erased the truth, and no one would even know. She was gone. Mason couldn't breathe. He had seen what she showed him. Her memories. Her pain. And more than that, he had seen her strength. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that survives. They feared her because she could see them. She saw things they wanted to bury. He stood up. He had to do something, but he wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a spy. He was just a maintenance tech with access to wires and tools. Still, that meant he had access to doors. He slipped into the corridor and headed toward the cell level. He avoided the cameras. He had mapped out their blind spots after his first visit. His steps were fast but silent. When he reached her cage, he paused. She was awake. I know, she said softly before he could speak. Mason blinked. You know what? They're going to kill me. His mouth went dry. How? I felt it. In the walls. In the silence. Something has changed. She looked at him, calm and ready. I've been waiting. Mason gritted his teeth. You don't have to die. Shala looked at him gently. Mason, no one has ever fought for me. I'm not them. He took a deep breath and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small security chip he had stolen earlier that day. It was old tech, but it could disable the lock for 40 seconds. Enough time to open the cage and get her out. I'm going to help you escape. But before she could answer, she whispered, Wait. She reached her hand through the bars. I want to show you something. Mason hesitated. Last time, her touch had nearly knocked him breathless. But he trusted her. Their fingers touched. A wave of images hit him. But these weren't memories. They were visions, a hidden chamber, strange lights, alien symbols, documents, secrets, a council meeting, high-ranking officers whispering about Project Black Veil. Then, a young alien child her child locked. In a pod, alone, crying. Mason gasped. He stumbled back, eyes wide. They still have your son, Shala nodded. Alive, somewhere on this station. They lied. They said he died. They always lie. Mason stared at her. If I help you escape, will you help me find him? I will give my life for it. The lights in the hallway flickered. It was the signal. Security was rerouting for a night drill. He had planned this window for hours. Now he had only minutes. Mason looked at her, heart pounding. Can you walk? I can run, she replied, standing for the first time. He reached for the lock, but on the upper level, someone was already watching them through a hidden camera. A silent observer in the shadows. And he had just activated the kill team asterisk the escape plan. The lock clicked. The sound was small, almost soft, but in that silent sealed corridor, it was thunder. The cage that had held Shayla for months slid open with a hiss. She stepped forward, her bare feet touching the ground outside for the first time since her capture. Mason stood beside her, his breath quick, his pulse louder than the alarm that hadn't sounded yet. "Stay close to me," he whispered. "We have one shot." They moved quickly. Mason led her through maintenance tunnels most officers didn't even know existed. Pipes hissed overhead. The scent of oil and heat filled the narrow space. The route was tight, dark, and not made for comfort, but it was invisible to scanners behind them. In the main corridor, footsteps echoed. The kill team had arrived, but the cage was already empty. Above ground, command was in chaos. Someone had hacked into the station logs. Cameras had gone dark. Internal doors had been overridden. They didn't know who, but they knew something. The prisoner was gone. "Seal every exit," the commander ordered. "She cannot leave this facility." But it was too late. Mason reached the end of the tunnel and forced open a grate. They climbed out into an empty hangar, lit only by backup lights. The emergency drill he had triggered earlier gave them just 9 minutes before full lockdown. Shala paused. Her legs trembled. "It's been so long," she said. "I forgot what it feels like to walk free." "You'll remember more once we're off this rock," Mason said, pulling her toward his ship. It was old, a small courier vessel he had personally repaired over the past year. Nothing fancy, but fast enough and quiet enough to escape unnoticed. As the doors closed behind them, Shayla collapsed into the passenger seat, her strength draining. The drugs from her captivity were still in her system. Her fingers trembled as she buckled in. Mason fired up the engines. Outside, red lights flared. "They've found us," he said through gritted teeth. A voice shouted over the comm. "Unauthorized launch detected. Vessel HN8, power down and return immediately." Mason ignored it. The ship lifted, engines roaring, and soared toward the dark sky. But behind them, 2 interceptors gave chase. "They're gaining," Shala said. "I know." He banked the ship hard, diving into the planet's dense storm clouds. Lightning lit the sky around them, and rain battered the hull. The interference gave them cover, but it wouldn't last long. A missile lock warning screamed across the dash. "Come on, come on." Mason muttered, fingers flying across the controls. He pulled the emergency flare lever. The missile launched. "Hey." Second later, so did the flare. It worked. The missile exploded harmlessly in the clouds behind them. But another warning followed. 2 more incoming, the ship's AI announced coldly. Mason looked at Shala. "I need time to calculate a jump, but we'll never survive another hit." Shala, weak but focused, reached toward the console. "I can help." "What do you mean?" "Touch the panel. Let me see what your ship remembers." He hesitated, then did as she asked. Her fingers brushed his. Instantly, data began to scroll across the screen. Coordinates, fuel levels, warp angles, gravitational currents. The ship's memory, its hidden systems, everything unlocked. Her mind moved through the data like a wave. "There," she whispered, "a hidden system, an abandoned moon. We can vanish there." Mason entered the code and hit the drive switch. The ship shook violently as it jumped into hyperspace. Behind them, the interceptors hit only empty air. In the silence that followed, Mason let out a long breath. He looked at Shala. "You saved." "US," she smiled faintly. "You freed me. I only returned the favor." But far away, back on the base, the commander stared at a black monitor. "She's with a human now," he growled. "And if she speaks, our secrets burn." He turned to his men. "Send out the hunters." The lost planet. The ship fell out of hyperspace with a sudden jolt. Mason gripped the controls, fighting the turbulence as the stars twisted into stillness. Before them floated a gray, crater-covered moon orbiting a dead world. no signals. Number. Satellites, no life. It was exactly what they needed. Nothing. This place. Shala whispered, staring out the window. I've seen it before. Mason turned to her. In a vision? No, she said slowly. In my childhood. The ship landed softly in a broken valley. Dust clouds rose around them like ghosts. The moment the hatch opened, Shala stepped out and dropped to her knees. Her fingers brushed the dirt. This isn't just a hiding place, she said. This was once home. Mason looked around. Home? I thought your people were wiped out. They were, she said, standing, but not all at once. They moved through the ruins, long buried beneath sand and silence. Strange symbols were carved into stone walls, overgrown with vines. Tall statues with glowing eyes watched from shadows. Every corner of the moon whispered of a people lost too soon. La led him to a large stone gate half buried in rock. I remember this, she said. It was called the Vault of Memory. Mason brushed off dust from the symbols. Is it safe to go in? She nodded. Safer than staying out here. The real monsters are coming. Inside, the air was warm and dry. Crystals pulsed faintly in the walls, reacting to their presence. As they walked deeper, Shala's posture straightened. Her eyes grew brighter. With every step, she felt stronger, like something ancient was awakening inside her. They reached a central chamber with a round platform. In the center stood a single stone pedestal, glowing blue. Shala stepped forward and placed her hand on it. The room came alive. Light shot up the walls. Voices echoed memories of her people. Laughter, stories, songs in a language that hadn't been spoken in decades. Mason watched, speechless, as a hologram appeared. It showed a council chamber, the same one from her visions. He recognized the alien commanders, younger but already corrupt. They were speaking about an energy source, a power hidden inside Shala's bloodline, a power they feared would expose their crimes. Then came the part that made Mason's blood freeze. The council ordered not to destroy the bloodline but to control it, to breed it, use it. Shala's child had not been killed, he had been taken. To be raised as a tool. Mason's fists tightened. They lied to you. They lied to everyone. Shala closed her eyes, trembling. And now I remember everything. Suddenly, her eyes snapped open. She turned her head sharply. They're here. Mason followed her gaze. Outside the vault, a sleek black ship descended into the valley. No lights, no noise. But deadly. The hunters, Mason said. Shala touched the pedestal again. A hidden panel opened beside it, revealing a curved device, half staff, half blade. She picked it up and held it as if her hands had always known its shape. I will not run again, she said. Mason looked at her, feeling something shift in the air around her. She was no longer weak, no longer hunted. She was remembering who she was, but she also looked at him and said something he didn't expect. I want you with me. Not because you saved me, but because you believed in me. Outside, shadows moved closer. The first hunter raised his weapon, but inside the ruins, something ancient was waking. And this time, the so-called monster was ready to fight. Back. Asterisk, the hunt begins. The first shot hit the stone wall like thunder. Dust exploded around them. Mason grabbed Shala's arm and pulled her down just as a second blast tore through the archway. The hunters were not here to capture. They were here to erase. Shala didn't flinch. They want silence, she said, standing up slowly. But I carry too many voices now. She stepped forward, the ancient weapon glowing in her hand. The blade hummed like it was alive. The air around her shifted heavier, thicker. Mason felt it too, like something had awakened inside her. Outside. The hunters advanced, 6 of them, masked and armored, weapons drawn. They moved like shadows, trained and heartless. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were silencers. Specialist. The leader raised his hand to stop the others. "She's unarmed," he said into his com. "Let me end it myself." He stepped forward. Shala did not move. "I remember your face," she said. "You stood in the room where they took my son." He froze. "You were younger then, afraid, and you let it happen." His helmet shifted slightly, but he didn't reply. He aimed his weapon. Shala moved faster than thought. The light in her weapon burst like lightning. The blade danced, and in one smooth motion, the hunter's rifle fell in pieces. A second swing knocked him to the ground. He didn't rise. The others opened fire. Mason ducked behind a pillar, shouting, "We're outnumbered." Shayla spun through the air, her body glowing with energy. Bullets and beams hit a pulsing shield around her, absorbing the attacks. She didn't fight like someone who had trained. She fought like someone who remembered. Mason activated an old defense panel in the ruins. A low barrier sprang up around the entrance. It wouldn't last long, but it was enough for now. "They won't stop," he said. "Even if we run again, they'll follow." "I know," she replied, breathing hard. "But we don't need to run anymore. We need to speak." Mason frowned. "What do you mean?" She turned to him, eyes glowing. "I found something that this temple holds, a beacon, a signal older than their lies. I can send a message across the systems. Show the truth. Not just my story, but the files we found, the orders, the crimes." "You mean tell everyone?" "Yes. Let them all hear the voices that were buried." Mason hesitated. "They'll try to jam the signal. Kill anyone who listens. They can try." She placed the weapon into a slot on the pedestal. The crystals responded instantly. The ground trembled. A beam of light shot upward, piercing the ceiling and out into the sky like a sword. Across the stars. Old receivers, forgotten satellites, and ancient recorders woke from their long sleep. The truth began to spread. Footage, records, the cries of Shala's people, the faces of corrupt leaders, the stolen children, the fear. The lies. Galactic feeds lit up. Broadcasts were interrupted. In control rooms, generals froze. In cities, civilians gasped. Protests sparked within hours, but in that moment, back on. The ruined moon, the last hunter stood in the chamber, his gun to Mason's head. Shayla turned to face him. Her hand raised. "Don't." "I was ordered to erase you," the hunter said coldly. "I know," she replied, "but I forgive you." His finger twitched on the trigger, but he couldn't pull it. Something in her voice, something in her eyes, shattered his will. He dropped the weapon. Shayla stepped forward and placed a hand on his helmet. The light flowed again, memories, pain, truth. And when she pulled away, the hunter sank to his knees, silent. Mason exhaled. "That's it. It's done." "No," she said quietly. "This is just the beginning." Asterisk the words that changed. Everything the stars had never felt so quiet. Mason stood beside Shala on the ridge above the temple ruins. The ancient beacon still glowed faintly behind them, its signal sent. Across the galaxy, billions had seen the truth. The silence that had hidden her pain was broken, but now the noise was coming. 3 warships entered orbit, massive, dark, and full of fear. Shala didn't flinch. "They won't come to speak," Mason said. "They'll come to erase the signal, erase you." "They can try," Shala answered softly. Dropships began to descend from the warships. Mason counted at least a dozen, each packed with soldiers. He knew what that meant. They were afraid now, truly afraid. And scared leaders don't ask questions. They just fire. Inside the temple, Shala returned to the pedestal one last time. The final part of the vault had opened, revealing a crystal memory core smaller than her palm, yet carrying generations of knowledge. "This is all that's left of my people," she said, holding it close. "Their stories, their names, their truth." "What will you do with it?" Mason asked. "I'll give it away," she replied, "so no one can ever bury it again." Mason felt a tightness in his throat. In every story he had ever heard, the Mia hero either won or died, but Shala was different. She wasn't here to win or lose. She was here to be heard. Moments later, the soldiers entered the ruins. They were met with silence. At the center, they found her standing alone, unarmed, the memory crystal in her hand. One of the commanders stepped forward. "You are under arrest by order of the Galactic Council. You are charged with spreading enemy propaganda, resisting detainment, and illegal escape." Shala looked at him with calm, glowing eyes. "Is truth now considered a weapon?" He didn't answer. "The Council fears me not because I am dangerous, but because I remember what they want to forget. They fear the strength of a voice that refuses to stay quiet." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the entire ruin. "You call me a monster," she continued, stepping forward. "But the monsters are the ones who take children and silence mothers. I was locked in a cage for what I could see, what I could feel, but I'm not the only one who sees now." Soldiers began to shift uncomfortably. The transmission had already spread. Protests had begun. Council members were being questioned. The galaxy was listening, and Shala's voice would not be forgotten again. The commander raised his weapon but paused. Then something happened that no one expected. One by one, soldiers began to lower their guns. The silence that followed was not fear, it was respect. Mason stepped forward and took Shala's hand. She looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, she smiled without sadness. He had found her in a cage. He had freed her. But she had done something far greater. She had freed the truth. They walked out of the ruins together. No one stopped them. Far above, warships floated in silence. No orders were given. No attack was made, because even the powerful knew the galaxy had changed. And it all began with one human who looked at the so-called monster and simply said, "Come with me."